Have you ever wondered how a democratic country can so easily fall prey to an authoritarian dictator? Failing democracies have symptoms. History has written this story countless times already, but we tend to forget, don't we? We forget how fragile democracies are and how difficult they are to hold on to. In 1919, Germany had just lost World War I. Millions of people had died. German leaders were forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles. Many Germans, especially veterans, felt humiliated and betrayed by their leaders. The Great Depression hit in 1929. Trauma from the war plus an economic crisis created the perfect storm. It was in this climate of bitterness that Hitler rose to prominence. Hitler took advantage of the people's anger, offering them convenient scapegoats and a promise to restore Germany's former greatness. Hitler wasn't popular to begin with. He only had a fringe following. In 1923, they attempted a government coup, but like the Capitol insurrectionists, they failed. Ultimately, Hitler was jailed for treason for 9 months. After his release from jail, he immediately began to rebuild his movement. Over time, Hitler's manipulative public speaking drew larger and larger crowds. His speeches tapped into and exploited people's fear and anger until they were compelled to put their support behind him. In 1932, Hitler ran for president and lost, but with 36% of the vote, he had demonstrated the extent of his support. This led to him being appointed chancellor. He abolished freedom of the press, banned rival parties, and of course, installed anti-Semitic laws. He also established a propaganda department, which produced art, film, and books, all praising Hitler and embracing his vision of a better Germany. His supporters formed paramilitary groups, fighting protesters in the streets. Hitler was driven by bigotry and paranoia, which became the source for his conspiracy theories. Meanwhile, Hitler continued raising fears of a communist uprising, arguing that only he could restore law and order. Long-suffering Germans believed they'd found their savior. Prominent leaders and businessmen in the community ended up endorsing Hitler. They were disturbed by his rhetoric, but they assured and convinced themselves and each other that it was only for show, that certainly he'd tone it down once in office. In 1934, after President von Hindenburg's death, Hitler declared himself an absolute dictator. Hitler's words found resonance in a society with many anti-Semitic people, much like Trump's words found resonance in a society with many racists, both overt racists and closet racists. But here's the good news. The important role of vigilant citizens in preventing the rise of tyranny cannot be underestimated. This is why we can't afford to look away. We continue speaking truth to power, especially those of us who currently have social privileges. Always remember that the choice to not pay attention, to look away, is a privilege itself.